What's up, guys? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of our videos. Also, make sure you follow us all over social media so you don't miss any of our content or show announcements. All right, Jimmy Butler, my top 3 trade destinations. Jimmy had one goal when he decided he was going to make a giant mess of things in Miami. He wanted to force Pat Riley's hand into trading him before this year's deadline. And according to all of the reports that I've seen, it has worked. And the Heat are at least intent on getting him moved before next Wednesday's deadline. So, with that being the case, here are my top 3 destinations. Number 3, the Milwaukee Bucks. Not necessarily the greatest fit in the world, putting him next to Giannis. Teams would likely guard any action that involves Jimmy and Giannis directly by switching, which means that they would have to be able to be off-ball threats for each other. Because if they're both in the action, that's great. But if they switch, one's going to have to go create space for the other, which means they're going to have to play off of each other. Now, Jimmy has become a knockdown catch-and-shoot guy, but he has a slow release, and he doesn't take many of them. Giannis obviously would be more of a dunker spot guy off of Jimmy, which is a form of spacing, but it's not great. So, it's not necessarily the perfect fit, but it is a massive talent play. The deal would likely center around Chris Middleton and Bobby Portis. Now, both of those guys have been valuable to Milwaukee in different ways throughout this year. Chris Middleton, for instance, hasn't shown much in terms of top-end offensive talent, but his ability to handle a ball in the half court and kind of set up his teammates with some advantages has been really helpful. He had another 7-assist game the other day. And Bobby Portis, his scoring, his spot-up shooting, and particularly his rebounding have been missed on this road trip where the Bucks have been struggling a little bit. But neither of those guys have been particularly good. And both of them have large salaries that can be used to facilitate a deal, as long as Pat Connaughton can be moved in order to get out from underneath that second apron. So if you make that sort of move, there's a drawback, which is Giannis basically becomes your backup center. But you have a player in Jimmy Butler that is much, much better at basketball on both ends of the floor than either of Bobby Portis or Chris Middleton. He gives you another athlete to deploy on the perimeter defensively for a team that desperately needs these types of athletes. He gives you a better chance of surviving Giannis off minutes. This is one of the more exciting parts of it. Both the offense and defense have been bad this year when Dame is on the floor without Giannis. Jimmy just gives you a better chance to survive or maybe even thrive in those minutes when Giannis is sitting. And then in the playoffs, Jimmy is still just one of the most versatile weapons in the league. There's a very specific reason why Jimmy is always great in the playoffs. And no, it's not just because he has that dog in him or any other meaningless platitude. It's because he's big, he's strong, and he's really good at a lot of different things on a basketball court. The size and strength makes him less vulnerable to the playoff physicality when you get into that setting. And then his versatility allows him to adjust his approach on either end of the floor from opponent to opponent. This is a team I'm going to run a lot of high ball screens in. This is a team, if you need Jimmy to run high ball screens and pick teams apart, he can do that. If you need Jimmy to attack mismatches in the post, he can do that. If you need Jimmy to stand in the corner and knock down wide open standstill jump shots, he can do that. If you need Jimmy to be a transition player, he can do that. If you need Jimmy to defend on the ball, he can do that on a variety of different guys. If you need Jimmy to defend off the ball, he can do that. He can rebound. He is such a versatile player that he can plug and play into anything his team needs him to do, and he's big and strong, which allows him to thrive in the physicality. That's what makes him such a unique playoff player. So I think bringing him in would be just a talent play for Milwaukee that would give them a better chance to hang with the top teams in the conference. Number 2, the Golden State Warriors. Now, this would be much more complicated to pull off because the Warriors have 6 players that make between $5 and $10 million. So it's just really tough for them to match salary, and any deal would basically have to include Andrew Wiggins or Draymond Green. My guess is Miami would want Andrew Wiggins because he would be able to immediately help Miami at the same position Jimmy plays. Right now, Haywood Highsmith is in that role, so Miami would be getting an upgrade in the form of Andrew Wiggins, who just had another great game last night against the Thunder. So the deal would in all likelihood center around some combination of Wiggins and Kuminga, plus another 2 salaries, probably Buddy Hield and Kyle Anderson. Maybe you can convince them to let you keep Kuminga if they like the draft compensation enough. I would again, every time I talk about this with Warriors fans, I don't think you give up Kuminga just for poops and giggles. You try to keep Kuminga out of the deal. I'm just saying if that's what it takes, that's what you got to pay. You'd get back something like Jimmy Butler and Josh Richardson, something along those lines. And then the Heat obviously get plenty of talent that can help right away with their goals. And apparently, I was reading a Mark Stein piece yesterday that said that Miami really needs to make the playoffs this year in terms of future draft compensation that they owe to other teams. So if you were to make that deal, this is what you'd be left with. In this case, we'll call it Buddy Hield and Kyle Anderson plus Kuminga, just for the sake of the worst case scenario. Obviously, if you get to keep Kuminga and you get to include a different player, that's ideal. But in that case, you'd be left with Steph, Jimmy, and Draymond, Dennis and Trace Jackson Davis, probably your starting five, right? Off the bench, you still have Kevon Looney, you still have Moses Moody, you still have Gary Payton II, you still have Podziemski. You still have Lindy Waters, Guy Santos, Quentin Post, and Pat Spencer. Again, this is the advantage of having the depth of role player talent that they have. And Josh Richardson would be in that mix too. You just have so many damn good players that you can afford to lose a few in order to bring back a primary shot creator. You get a star to anchor units with Steph off the floor. You get an offensive star to run two-man game with Steph that teams will not want to switch so you can get teams into rotation consistently. And most importantly, on this team that has an enormous amount of role player depth but a complete lack of top-end talent, you turn some of that role player depth into star talent to better balance out your roster. I also don't think Golden State would have to include much in the way of draft compensation to make it work, especially if Kuminga was in the deal. I would actually be trying to include draft compensation at the expense of keeping Kuminga out of the deal, just for the talent. Now, again, the biggest challenges for the Warriors to make this work will be matching salary. The Heat apparently do not want to take back any contract that lasts past next season. Andrew Wiggins has a player option, but I have a feeling he might be willing to opt out and re-sign somewhere else, or maybe even with the Heat at that point. Kyle Anderson's last year is non-guaranteed, so you're good there. Buddy Hield is the tough one. Buddy Hield has, but I think it's possible that I read something that his deal might not be guaranteed after last year either, so that might work. But I would just do everything I can to not include Gary Payton II because I think he's an excellent rotation piece in the playoffs. And then I would try like hell to leave Kuminga out of it. But again, it's a long shot, but I actually think it pieces together kind of nicely for the Warriors if they could pull it off. Number one, though, by far for me, is my favorite destination for Jimmy Butler is still the Phoenix Suns. Now, there's a huge roadblock in this deal. You got to get a team that is willing to take on Bradley Beal and that Bradley Beal is willing to waive his no-trade clause for. And that makes things tough, which is why other teams like Milwaukee, like Golden State are in the mix right now. But I think this is the team that Jimmy can help the most by far. Jimmy is everything that the Suns don't have. He can legit pressure the rim on offense as both a bully ball player and as just an overall matchup attacker. But in a way that's more impactful because he's also excellent at passing out of those situations. And the Suns can provide him with real spacing thanks to what Kevin Durant and Devin Booker do. He's a star that can play on both ends of the floor in a way that Bradley Beal can't, but that Devin Booker and Kevin Durant can. He can meet them at that level, and then he fundamentally alters their physical profile. As currently constructed, the Suns are too thin. They can be pushed around. But if you get a front line that has Jimmy Butler, Kevin Durant, Nick Richards, it's just more physically imposing in terms of length, athleticism, and size and strength. I also think he can help them with their ball pressure issues. Part of the reason why Devin Booker and Kevin Durant can struggle with ball pressure from time to time is they're a little thin. They can struggle under physicality. Jimmy Butler thrives under physicality. Now, they're going to have to find another team to help facilitate that, but that's a type of deal that I think could really, really help the Suns get to another level that they can't reach at this point under their current roster restrictions.